Hello everyone, my name is Dayanara Hernandez. I am a junior here at the University of Northern Iowa. I'm currently majoring in elementary education with a minor in TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. I am from Des Moines, Iowa, but I was born in Mexico and I came to the United States 7 years ago. Here's a picture of my family and I when I graduated from high school. Today I'm going to talk about three different things: my UDL lesson plan, my experience taking SPED 3150, which is meeting the needs of diverse learners in classrooms, and how taking this class has helped me become more open-minded and aware of the different needs that students have, as well as how as teachers we can provide support and a hand for students to hold while they give their first steps into learning a language or any further accommodations they might need. And third, my own experience as a second language learner since I came to the United States 7 years ago, as I mentioned earlier. Before starting your lesson, think about what grade you want to teach and then select your standards. I wanted to learn more about second grade and its literacy standards. And for this lesson, I decided to work with second grade literacy. By selecting your standards, you will have a better idea of what your unit's going to be about, what your objectives are going to look like, and what is your end goal. In this case, I selected a second grade literacy standard that will have students describe how words and phrases such as regular beat, alliteration, rhymes, repeated lines supply rhythm and meaning in a story, poem, or song. Then transitioning over to creating my objectives, something to consider while creating your objectives is to align them with the standards, but also think about what is the best way to teach this standard to your students. After you have your objectives ready, arrange the order of your objectives in a manner in which they will align with the structure of the unit and each lesson you have in mind. This will allow you to remember why it's important for each student to accomplish the objectives in the order you provided. For my lesson, for lesson one, students will be introduced into rhyming poems. And then lesson two will have students learn the structure of a rhyming poem. Lesson three will connect rhyming poem with culture. And then for lesson four, students will be in a group and they will do a research on a place and its cultural background, food, activities, etc. And for lesson five, a student will create a poem as a group and share it with the whole class. Then transitioning over to unit abstract, um, first you have to select your topic. Look over standards. What are you interested in? What will your students be interested in? For my lesson, I chose literacy and I focused on poetry and Valentine's Day since it was February by the time I will be teaching this lesson. Then consider the time of length you have for your class. For my class, it's 40 minutes long since it's a general education classroom. Also, what are the topics you are going to teach and consider if students have background knowledge over the topic. So throughout this unit, students will be transitioning from being able to identify the structure of a rhyming poem to learning different rhyming words, how many stanzas are in a poem, who can create a poem, and how to differentiate a rhyming poem from a narrative text poem. When planning, always consider students' backgrounds and fluency of the language and if they need any further recommendations. For my lesson, I always plan on thinking about my two students who speak English as their second language and my student with ADHD who has troubles focusing and getting engaged with in activities. Also, how can you promote diversity if you have a diverse class and help the students feel more comfortable in the classroom? For this lesson, I had students as a group research a place they will agree with and learn about cultural background, food of the place, the different activities they take place in. They're popular in that specific culture. Then, how are you going to evaluate students' learning? Um, Let them be the leaders of their learning in research. And lastly, with the information they have found, create a poem as a group and use it as a final evaluation. Lastly but not least, how can you show students that their effort, education, and work matters? After students have created their poems, they will share it to the class. Then we will hang all the poems outside of the door where everyone who passed by can see them. Then going over to what is your unit goal? Always start with your end goal in mind and try to think about what you expect the students to gain from this lesson. For my lesson, by the end of the week, students will have learned about rhyming words, the structure of a poem, how to create a poem, and the background of different countries. One of my goals while creating this poem lesson was to promote diversity, and I think I was able to accomplish this by having students do some research on cultures and be able to let them be the leaders of their own learning. The students will have to learn about different countries in the world and in groups create a beautiful poem for this place. This will allow students to learn about cultures, but also promote inclusion by feeding themselves with information they're finding. Also, think about students' effort and dedication while creating your goals. To appreciate my students' effort, I will hang these poems outside of the door. I will also tweet and attach them to teachers and see the reaction of teachers towards this activity. As I mentioned before, everyone will be able to see what our class has accomplished and done. Then going over to materials, it's crucial for you to have all your materials ready and in a sequence that will match your lesson. As you can see, I first provided a pre-assessment, then a video to present to the class. This video will include illustrations, pointing out things, songs, rhymes, and repetition. Always have an alternative plan. In my case, I thought about the board not working, and instead of projecting the video on the board, I will have students in groups of 4, and one of the students will get his or her computer out and watch the video as a group. Then for my anticipatory set, always think about how you're going to get students interested in the unit. How are you going to connect it to the previous unit you were learning with them? And always appreciate a student's effort and work. In this case, I decided to intrigue students about the unit by using questions such as, do you want to know a secret? I know that you've been working extremely hard at understanding what a poem is, but did you know that a poem is constructed with multiple parts? Which first needs a poet, and it can even be composed of rhyming words, stanzas, and your beautiful voice. Do you know what rhyming words are? Well, let me tell you. They are words that have similar sounds and sometimes even have similar ending forms. Do you know you can become a poet and create your own poem? As I mentioned earlier, always try to appreciate students' effort and try to connect learning with their interests. Then going over to instructional activities, step-by-step procedure, you will have multiple steps to explain step by step each of the activities that are going to take place in class, and you have to put them in order. Always create your lesson and instructions thinking that is a substitute teacher might teach your class for the day. Here's my example for the instructional activities step-by-step procedure. As I mentioned before, I started my unit by asking questions such as, do you know what rhyming words are? Then ideally, if the projector works, I will project the video and as a whole class later on try to solve the challenges that the video includes. After watching the video, then I will tell my students that for their next activity, they will be working in groups of 4, where they will play a game as a whole class, where as a group, they will agree and decide which of the options on the board will be the correct answer for our game. Then I will ask students what the expectations are on working in a group. You as a teacher should not tell the students what the expectations are, but instead, let students tell you what their expectations should be. The group expectations for my class will ideally include staying in your group, no negative talk, work together, keep eyes and ears open, quiet, talking, and no screaming. Then I will give students specific instructions about the task they will be performing and what I expect them to do. Something to consider is the time in which you're going to be passing your materials out. So when do you think it's the appropriate time and your students are not going to get distracted while important information is being said? And then it is important for students to have the opportunity to share their opinion with others and interact with other classmates, but it is also important to evaluate each student's individual knowledge. For this purpose, in my example, I had students work in groups to share their opinion, but also to give students who speak a second language the opportunity to engage in smaller groups and share their own ideas and opinions with students that feel comfortable with sharing their own opinion. Then lastly, students will go back to their normal spot, and then I will hand them a worksheet assignment that they will start in the classroom, but will have to take home and finish it. Always make sure you give examples and support students' skills and knowledge. To ensure this is my lesson, after handing the worksheet to students, I will complete two problems where I show a step-by-step explanation to students and help them better understand how to do the assignment. Also, take into account your student's age. I knew student second grade might need a recap on directions, and I restated that they have to finish their worksheet before they come back the next day to have a chance to review the topic again. To conclude this lesson, I will have my students shout out their favorite two rhyming words that they have learned during this activity by watching the videos, playing the game in group, and matching the words before they walk out of the door. For engagement, representation, and action and expression, for engagement, I have all my resources listed in chronological order according to the order of my lesson. I have a pre-assessment, YouTube video, game for students to play as a group in a whole class, matching card games as a group. Cards include words and pictures on them, and my master assessment. For representation, I explained the purpose of using each of the items used for this lesson. As I mentioned, each of these resources has a purpose when it comes to learning for students. My pre-assessment will allow the teacher to know what level her students are on. The YouTube video helps students that learn visually and step-by-step explanations. Playing games as a whole class helps students communicate with each other. Matching card games will allow students to practice hands-on activities. Master assessment allows the teacher to know if she has accomplished her goal for the students. And then for action and expression, I will explain how I use the items to collect information about my students' knowledge and how these activities improve my students' learning skills. For example, pre-assessment will allow me as a teacher to know where my students are and how advanced they are in the topic we're going to review. The YouTube video helps students who have troubles understanding the language, and by watching the video, they have a visualization resource to help them understand the topic. This will also help the students that like to learn by having visual representations and step-by-step explanation. The game allows students to dialogue with each other. This is because they have to come up with an answer together and have a discussion as a group. This allows students to discuss with each other, but also helps students feel included because every student is participating once. The mastery assessment at the end of the day will allow me as a teacher to see what knowledge and skills my students have gained from this lesson. Then going over to lesson differentiation, this is where you come up with the ideas to modify your lesson. What will encourage a student's participation, and you will have to find, adapt materials or instruction for students. For example, in my lesson, I had to think about my student with ADHD and my student whose English is their second language. To accommodate and differentiate during group discussion, I will allow my student who has ADHD to have a stress ball in his hand that he can use to help him focus. I'll also allow the student to sit in his exercise ball. I will have a para-educator in my classroom to help the students stay on track and focus and assist with further help he might need. I will also encourage the para-educator to meet one-to-one and give simpler explanation to this student. For students having English as their second language, I will translate directions to Spanish and I will explain examples in Spanish to them as well. I will pair them with diverse students to promote inclusion. I will meet with them one-to-one to give them better directions and allow them to feel included. Another thing I will do is talk to the ELL professor and dialogue with her regarding strategies that will help the students understand the topic even better. And now going over to activities included in the UDL lesson plan. I try to incorporate videos, games, group work, writing tasks, reading tasks, individual work, work examples, work in Spanish and English. I try to use a variety of strategies to try to meet my students' needs and accommodate their learning styles. Here are more examples of the diverse strategies I use for my lessons. And you can also look at each of the activities I use closely, going to slide 23 and 24, and actually look over how I apply each of these activities in my lesson and how I use them as a strategy for learning. Before creating my lesson, I went back to the readings we had in class and reread some of the quotes I highlighted and try to understand better the why do we use and need differentiation in a lesson. Well, here are some of the quotes that help me understand the differentiation and its purpose. I remember bomb threats and the sudden disappearance of white friends into style open private schools. Yes, it is the silence that stand out most in my memory. This is a quote that impacted my way of thinking towards how aware students are of what is going on around them. Students can critically think about everything, even if sometimes we don't think they know what is happening. For this reason, we have to take into consideration our future students' decision and opinions. My second quote is, it follows then that what teachers believe about disability determines how students with disabilities are educated. This quote determines that the beliefs of an educator shape the way a student learns and the way students are seen by others in the community and inside the classroom. This quote also means that educators are the key to a student's success, development, and achievement. And my last quote says, to understand our position, it's necessary to let the disabled describe some of their experience in their own words. We have to take into consideration if the students believe the assigned classification is correct and the classification fits their knowledge, skills, and education perception. Diversity is around the world, and no matter the color, nationality, culture, or label of a student, every student deserves the same opportunity, attention, and success. It's crucial to understand that each student understands and acquires information differently, and every student acquires learning at a different level. And you as a teacher have to try to help all of your students to get to the same level. At this moment, you might think that I've done extra work for this lesson, and you might or might not be wrong, but I remember the 12-year-old Dayanara who just needed someone to hold her hand and not let her give up, helping her feel included and not like an outsider, and telling her that in one way or the other, she was going to learn English. When I started school, I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong, and I felt sad, frustrated, and uncomfortable. My school wasn't very diverse because there were only 7 students who spoke different languages. I was paired with a student who, until this day, still speaks Spanish, and he helped me a lot with translation and talking to the teachers. Only one teacher translated documents in my language for me to understand, but for my other classes, I had to translate the documents. Always give explanation of the work you're expecting your students to do, because I didn't have the opportunity and saw how others could do the work, and I couldn't make it, and I felt like I didn't belong. Use visuals and give step-by-step explanations using simple words. This will facilitate students who are learning a second language understand the task better. Make students feel safe and welcome, and use each other as a resource. Lastly, always try to make a one-to-one conversation and show your students that their effort matters that their dedication and their learning also matters to you and everyone else. And here are each of the 5 lessons I created for the unit and each of the activities I incorporated as well. Here are my resources that I use for the PowerPoint and creating the lesson. And thank you for your time and attention.